this a nice tug when you're trying to remove it. Just kidding, not gonna stay. Back in 2018, Lian Li launched the O11 Air, a dual-chamber ATX case that's strongly focused on airflow. Now it's launching a mini version of that case, and one of the big questions I've seen from all of you is how it stacks up against Lian Li's ultra-popular O11 Dynamic Mini. So we're gonna try something new, and we're gonna do a side-by-side comparison with a full rundown of specs to better help you choose between the two. Let's jump in. All right, so I have the cases side by side here. On the right, we have the O11 Air Mini, which is the new case we're talking about, and I'll refer to this one as just the Air Mini from here on out. And then on the left, we have the O11 Dynamic Mini, which is the one that came out last year. So these cases are roughly the same size, but the Air Mini is actually a little bit larger. So this one is 400 millimeters in length by 288 millimeters in width by 384 millimeters in height. This makes it a little bit shorter and fatter than the O11D Mini, which is 420 millimeters in length by about 270 millimeters in width, and then 380 millimeters in height. Now, because these two cases are different sizes, the panels are not actually interchangeable for anyone who's wondering. They're also a little different in their makeup as well. So let me show you what I mean. Starting with the top panel on the Air Mini, this one has a wider and a more fine grain mesh pattern. There is also no removable dust filter at all. This is all you get for that filtration. On the O11D Mini, in contrast, this one has a wider mesh pattern, and it also comes with a removable dust filter that goes over the fans at the top here. And then real quick, while we're still looking at the cases from this angle, as you can see, quite obviously, the left side panels here are both tempered glass. But again, they are not the same size panels. So if for whatever reason you have both cases on hand, you can't swap them. Moving on to the front panels, as you can see, quite obviously, the Air Mini has a mesh front for better airflow, while the O11D Mini has a tempered glass front panel here for more of a showpiece kind of look. On the Air Mini's front panel, the mesh again is that smaller, tighter pattern that you saw on the top panel. And because of this, again, you don't get a removable dust filter at the front. For the eagle-eyed out there as well, just a note about the front in general, the strip here on the chassis, this is painted for both the white and the black versions. So there is no white version that has this kind of silver aluminum strip, just FYI. Rotating around to the right side panel for each of these cases. As you can see, like the top panels, these have very similar layouts, but the mesh patterns are different. So again, with the Air Mini, you have a finer grain kind of pattern here for the mesh, and because of that, no removable dust filters. But for the O11D Mini, you have a larger mesh pattern that pairs with removable dust filters like so. There's one difference between them. It's minor, but I do like it. So the O11D Mini doesn't have like a finger grip here. So when you're trying to remove this side panel, you kind of have to use just like pressure with your hands and hope you have a grip, right? But for the Air Mini, you do get a little finger grip area right here. It's a very small detail, but I do like that they added that. All right, so wrapping up our side-by-side look at the exterior on these two cases is the rear view. Now, on the Air Mini, I think the most obvious difference is that you have the power supply at the bottom here while you have the hard drive cage at the top. On the O11D Mini, the power supply is at the top while the storage or the hard drive cage is down below. On both cases, they are dual chamber systems, as you can see, but this swap is the main difference between them. Also the same is the modularity of the back section here on both sides. So the primary chamber, this section here where all your expansion slots are, that is modular on both. The key difference though is that while the O11D Mini has 3 different modes that you can go between, which is 7-slot mode, 5-slot mode, or 3-slot mode, and that's a reference to how many expansion slots you have available to you. On the Air Mini, so this new case we're talking about, this one only has 7-slot mode and 5-slot mode, so only 2 total. The reason why they look different right now is because they're actually configured differently at the moment. So this is in a 7-slot config and this is in a 5-slot config. For front I/O ports, it's the same on the Air Mini as it is on the O11D Mini. So what you're going to get is a power button, a 3.5mm combination audio headset jack, a single USB 3.1 Type-C port, and then 2 USB 3.0 Type-A ports. Now for the interior side-by-side comparison of these two cases. This is the part where I'm going to talk about the fan sizes supported, the rad sizes supported, clearances for CPU, GPU, power supply, how many storage drives you can put in here, all that jazz. It is a little bit spec heavy, lots of numbers that I'm going to throw at you. So if you get a little lost in all that, I have done an article on PCWorld.com as well. There should be a link in the description to that. So if you need to see things in a table, so it's a little easier for you to visualize or just to reference the numbers, that's there for you on the website. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, both of these cases have a dual chamber design. We're going to start by talking about stuff in the primary chamber here. First up is motherboard sizes. So the Air Mini right here, the new case that we're talking about, this one supports 4 motherboard sizes. That's eATX, ATX, Micro ATX, and Mini ITX. The O11D Mini, that one only does ATX, Micro ATX, and Mini ITX. As most people who build eATX know, with a smaller case like this, you will have to make sure that your chosen motherboard will actually be supported because this only supports up to certain sizes of eATX boards. Moving on to fan sizes, we're going to take this in sections, and I'm going to start with what's the same between the two cases. So at the top here, you get to do up to 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans, and that's the same as the O11D Mini. And also the same is that the rear here can do up to 1 120mm fan. For differences, let's start at the side here. So on the Air Mini, you're actually restricted to just one size, and that is 2 120mm fans. That's all you can accommodate here on the side panel right here. On the O11D Mini, you can actually do up to 2 120 or 2 140mm fans. At the bottom, on the Air Mini, you can do up to only 2 120 or 2 140mm fans. It's a little bit shorter on this case. You can't actually get a third 120mm fan. You're capped only at 2. On the O11D Mini, though, you can do up to 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans. And then at the front here, because there's these mounting brackets, which, by the way, are removable. So these are modular. You can take them off if you need to, and they actually come apart in 2 sections. You can also do here 2 120 or 2 140mm fans. As you can see, quite obviously on the O11D Mini, that is not an option. There are no fans. So you do get additional mounting spots here for fans on the Air Mini. Now let's move on to radiator sizes. We'll start with the top here. On the Air Mini, you can do up to a 240 or 280mm rad. That is a little bit less support than you get on the O11D Mini, which can do up to a 240, 280, or 360mm rad. At the bottom for the Air Mini, you can do again up to a 240 or 280mm rad. And That's, again, less support than you get on the O11D Mini, which, like the top here, can do up to a 240, 280, or 360 millimeter rad. At the side here, again, a little less support for sizes, so you're limited to up to a 240 millimeter rad on the Air Mini, whereas on the O11D Mini, you can do either up to a 240 or a 280 millimeter rad. However, in some compensation for the lack of 360 millimeter rad support on the Air Mini, you do get this fourth mounting spot for rads if you so choose to take it. The front here can do up to 240 or 280 millimeter rads. Okay, let's talk now about how much room you have for different components in these cases. We'll start with CPU cooler clearance. On the Air Mini, you get up to 167 millimeters of clearance here. On the O11D Mini, you get up to 170 millimeters of space. Now, for everyone who's been paying very close attention to all the specs I've been dumping on you and are wondering, hey, that's strange, isn't the Air Mini wider and fatter than the O11D Mini? How come I get less room for a CPU cooler? Well, it is true that the Air Mini is fatter, but it also supports ATX power supplies. The O11D Mini only supports small form factor power supplies. For the amount of space you get for GPUs, in the Air Mini, you can do cards up to 362 millimeters in length. For the O11D Mini, you can do cards up to 370 millimeters in length. If you choose to vertically mount your GPU and are curious about how much space you get between the card and the tempered glass side panel, with our reference GeForce GTX 1080 that we have here, I used it in both cases and measured. In the Air Mini, by my manual measurement, you get about 61 millimeters or about 2 3/8 inches of clearance between the panel and the GPU. In the O11D Mini, you get about 63.5 millimeters or about 2.5 inches of clearance between the glass panel and that same GTX 1080. Okay, so let's talk now about fan and radiator clearances, or how much room you get really for your radiators and fans in these two cases. Now, this again is going to be a little bit of a numbers dump, so if it becomes too much soup for you to keep track of, I do have that article on PCWorld.com with tables to hopefully make it a little easier for you to do the exact side-by-side comparison of the specs. I also, for reference, have these two cases configured a little differently. Unfortunately, we're a little crunched for time in production here at the office. So I have the Air Mini configured as a 7-slot mode, build right here. And then I have the O11D Mini set up as a 5-slot mode here. Now I know the cases are a little different. You will have to use a little bit of your imagination, unfortunately, but hopefully this gives you at least a sense of, where the bottom of an ATX board is going to fall in 7-slot mode versus, where the bottom of a micro ATX board is going to fall in 5-slot mode. So hopefully that, again, will help you with the visualization as we start talking about, how much room you have for the fans and the radiators. Let's start at the top. So for the Air Mini and the O11D Mini, in 7-slot mode and in 5-slot mode, the clearances are the same. In 7-slot mode, you get up to 25 millimeters of clearance here. So that's pretty much the height of a standard case fan. And as you can see right here, that's how much space you're really looking at relative to where the the top of the motherboard begins. In 5-slot mode here, it's up to 65 millimeters in height, and that's what it looks like there, with also case fans populating the top there. For the bottom, this gets a little bit more complicated, so I'm going to take it in little sections here. We'll start with 7-slot mode with an ATX motherboard. So for both the Air Mini and the O11D Mini, you officially get only 20 millimeters of clearance. So that means that you're going to actually have to find slim case fans if you want to populate here. And there's no support for 280 millimeter fans because of the clearance this way. However, as you can kind of clearly see here in the Air Mini, which is configured as a 7-slot ATX board configuration right now, that official restriction is really there only to, accommodate people who are going to put ATX with a bottom slot populated, and that's where you're going to run into conflicts. But if depending on the configuration of your motherboard, like say you don't have a USB 3.0 header coming out from the bottom here, and you're not going to populate the bottom slot, you might be able to do a 280 millimeter rad. You might be able to do, a very thick rad. It really depends on which slots you're populating. But again, the official limitation is 20 millimeters of clearance from the bottom here, 7-slot mode, ATX motherboard. Obviously, if you use a micro ATX or a mini ITX board, you're going to start getting way more official clearance there. Now let's talk about 5-slot mode and what that means in each case. So again, just as a reminder, the O11D Mini here is configured as a 5-slot config. You're going to use this approximately as your, visualization for what we're talking about in both cases in 5-slot mode, because they're very close. The difference is actually based more in what fan and radiator sizes are supported, and a little bit in the clearances. So with that said, in 5-slot mode, you can only do micro ATX or mini ITX boards. And for a micro ATX board in 5-slot mode, on the Air Mini here, you can do, for fans, up to 120, 140 fans, either or, that is, or you can do a 240 rad. You cannot do, at least officially, you cannot do a 280 millimeter radiator. But again, like we were discussing in 7-slot mode, that's a little dependent on your motherboard layout and what you populate in the bottom slots. You may have a little more wiggle room there to futz with that. Other than that, your clearances are pretty good. Like, you don't have to worry too much about having enough room for the height of a radiator with a micro ATX board. And you can kind of see there how much room you'd have relative to like where the video card would be. On the O11D Mini, it's a similar story. They do give an official limitation for micro ATX boards of 40 millimeters. But again, that is just dependent on what you're populating in there. And then for mini ITX, that one does officially support 280 millimeter radiators. So you're pretty much good to go on mini ITX, regardless of what you're populating here at the bottom. Moving on to the side here. So for this mounting spot, you get up to 59 millimeters in depth here. And then on the O11D Mini, you get up to 85 millimeters of depth to work with on 120 millimeter fans, or a 240 millimeter rad, and then up to 65 millimeters of depth for 140 millimeter, or 280 millimeter components. And that has to do with clearances for the graphics card, because that way you don't accidentally shorten how much length you get for those cards. And then finally, we're going to talk about the Air Mini's front here. So as you know, obviously you don't have any mounting spots on the O11D Mini. So just for here, on the Air Mini, you have the built-in space for fans here, so 25 millimeters of depth here. But for a radiator, so if you want to add a radiator on this side of the bracket, there's two different things you have to be aware of in terms of configuration. So if you have the top and the bottom mounting spots here, populated by two 240 millimeter radiators, so one here, you get up to 40 millimeters of clearance here for a rad at the front. But if you install 280 millimeter radiators at the top and the bottom, you get no clearance for a radiator here at the front, and you can only install the fans, and that's it. All right, so looking at the other chamber in the case, so this is on the right-hand side of the case, We'll go over power supplies real quick. So on the Air Mini, you can do power supplies, ATX power supplies, up to 200 millimeters in length. On the O11D, you can do only small form factor power supplies up to 165 millimeters in length. While we're on this side of the case, let's also talk about storage and how much you can support in each of these cases. In the Air Mini, you can do up to 6 drives, and that is 2 drives in the hard drive cage, either 2 3.5 or 2 2.5 inch drives. You can do 2 2.5 inch drives on this cable management bar here, and you can mount on either side. So you can do here or here, and then on this, for this part, only on this other side here. And then you can also install up to 2 2.5 or 2 3.5 inch drives on these brackets here, which are removable. I would say that if you are installing drives here, you're really not going to want to install any fans or a radiator on the other side because, one, rip airflow, but two, it actually doesn't mount very well this way. Now, I've kind of shoehorned it, if you've noticed, like I've got these panels on here and I still have a radiator on the other side, but I can tell you that things don't really screw down cleanly that way. It's not meant to be done this way. You can force it, but I don't recommend it. On the O11D Mini, you get up to 4 drives, and that's just in the drive cage here. So again, either 2 2.5 or 2 3.5 inch drives in the cage here, and then up to 2 2.5 inch drives on the cable management bar here. And on this one, you can install on either side, both top and bottom. All right, let's talk now about the vertical GPU mounting bracket and how that works with the Air Mini and also the O11D Mini. In a nutshell, it's pretty much the same because the bracket is literally the same for both cases. So accordingly, because these two cases are about the same height, the clearances are similar. I'm going to focus primarily on the Air Mini just because that's the one that has official clearances given. The O11D Mini doesn't really, not from everything that I've seen. And so when you're comparing the two, you can basically assume that they're very similar to each other in clearances. If you're planning a build where bare millimeters will count, then that might be a little bit more of a problem for you. But I think for most people, you should be able to more or less ballpark off of the Air Mini here. So what you're seeing right now is a 7-slot configuration, and I have it with an ATX motherboard. And so what you would do is take off the bracket for the standard configuration and then just slot the whole vertical GPU mount bracket in and then tighten it down. With this configuration, as you can see, it slots in at the top. You're going to get an official clearance from the bottom of 20 millimeters, which is actually less than the 25 millimeter height fans that you see here. That's because if you populate the bottom slot on an ATX motherboard, you're going to lose some of that clearance. So again, official clearance is 20 millimeters height and no 280 millimeter radiators for the Air Mini. Pretty similar for O11D Mini as well, but obviously if you don't populate that bottom slot, if your motherboard has one, you're going to have more room to work with. For micro ATX and mini ATX motherboards, then you get an official clearance of 60 millimeters in height, which is pretty much what you're seeing here without that bottom slot populated on this ATX motherboard. Moving on to a 5-slot vertically mounted GPU configuration. Again, the O11D Mini is similar to the Air Mini that you see here. So on the Air Mini, what I've done is put the bracket in at the 5-slot position, move down the motherboard standoffs, and then inserted the bracket here to take up the room. And once this is all in, very obviously, you get much less clearance here at the bottom. The official rating for it is 20 millimeters in height. So if you have a slim fan, you can put it here. Otherwise, if you have a 25 millimeter fan in height, you can put one off to the side here. Final point of comparison are the accessories that are included with these cases. On the right here, I have what's included with the Air Mini, and on the left here, I have what's included with the O11D Mini. Now, the O11D Mini has been a case touted as really great for custom water cooling, and accordingly, you actually get some extra brackets with it that you don't get with the Air Mini. So in addition to these two brackets that help move the case into a 5 or 3 slot mode on the O11D Mini, and obviously the screws and cable ties, you get 3 brackets for water pumps as well. And again, this is specific to custom water cooling. You don't get that with the Air Mini. All you get is this one bracket to help move the case into a 5 slot mode, and then the bag of screws and cable ties, and that's it. All right, so that does it for the side-by-side comparison of the O11 Air Mini and the O11D Mini. As for colors and pricing, you can get the Air Mini through Newegg for $110 for the black version and $120 for the white version, while the O11D Mini costs $115 for the black, $120 for the white, and $130 for the snow edition. As a reminder, the Air Mini's white version is going to be closest to the O11D Mini's snow version. For people living outside the US, good news, the prices are actually going to be cheaper for you by about $10 US. That does it for this one. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you like this kind of comparison, and if you have any feedback about this style of case coverage, please drop your comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.